Okay, today we're going to start talking about fingerprinting. We always needed in science and criminology a way of identifying individuals. We talked about the fact that at one point we used the Bertillon measurement system, where they would use measurements like your arm span, your height, from one end of your head to the other. And this system of measurements was how prisoners were identified until we had Adam West. And then we talked about the fact that another prisoner, Adam West, came in and had the exact same measurements, and they realized that that was not the best way to actually identify individuals. So what we're going to look at is fingerprinting, and we are going to look at the big picture of what the main types of shapes are in fingerprints, and then there are minutiae within the fingerprints that allows you to identify 8 to 12 of those that are what are considered to be a match. So you'll understand why it's individual evidence. Even identical twins have different fingerprints. It has to do with the fact that they are formed in different portions of the womb, and that causes them to have a distinct fingerprint. There may be no fingerprint evidence at a crime scene if they wear gloves. If none of the skin surfaces actually touched. And then we now have the ability to do computerized matching for prints, which is a lot more accurate than having individuals identify fingerprints themselves. So we'll look at the properties, we'll recognize what ridge patterns are, what friction ridge patterns are. Then we'll also start looking at the different types of fingerprints that can be done. Not all fingerprints are like ink fingerprints that you roll up. Fingerprints that you get at an actual crime scene are usually latent prints or plastic prints or visible prints. So a lot of times we will have to use different techniques to make the print visible, either by using powders or other chemicals. And we will actually go through some of these chemical methods that allow us to see a fingerprint. So for fingerprint analysis, number one, there's rolling and classifying prints. So inking prints, which is what we're going to do at the beginning. Learning about loop swirls, arches, and ridge characteristics. And then learning about primary identification number. We are going to lift prints using fingerprinting tape, using black, white, and fluorescent powder. We also use chemicals like anhydrine, iodine, silver nitrate, and cyanoacrylate, which will adhere to certain properties on the fingerprint. There are other body type of prints that can be used: palm, teeth, eye, voice, shoe prints, and footprints. So a fingerprint is considered to be an individual characteristic. Each person has one. It remains unchanged during a person's lifetime. The actual ridges that are underneath the skin surface that make up the fingerprint are the same consistently. As your skin layers move up and as you make new cells, it maintains that ridge pattern. They have basically specific ridges or patterns that can be used that allow them to be identified. So we're going to look, I'm not going to go the exact order of this because I want to look at a couple of different things before we go through that. Number one, here's a picture of your skin, which is what we're studying in anatomy right now. You've got an upper layer called the epidermis, and then you've got this middle layer called the dermis. Notice when you are looking at this, there is that up and down pattern there. That is called the dermal papillae. That is a layer in the dermis that creates that ridge. That's what actually forms your fingerprints. So that on top of that layer is the epidermis, which is all of the upper layer of your skin, and it will reproduce on that dermal papillae and will maintain those ridges that are in that underlying layer. Also realize that with your skin, you have oil glands, and those are over here. Those are your sebaceous glands. That releases oil with the fingerprints that allows the actual markings or the fingerprint mark that is left on surfaces. Also, you have eccrine glands, which are sweat glands, and that's also part of what leaves the residue of a fingerprint that can be used, made visible by powders and other techniques. So it is permanent because it's part of the structure of your skin. that it is in the dermal papillae. There are a couple of patterns that we usually see when you're looking at an overall print. One is an arch, and what you notice with an arch is it enters on one side, it goes up, and it exits the other side. So it enters one side of the finger, crosses to the other while raising up. They do not have other types of things in there called deltas and cores, which we will look at. There are two types of arches. There are plain and there are tented. This is a plain arch. A tented arch would go up higher in the center. So we will go past that and we'll look at a loop next. A loop enters one side, goes around, and exits the same side. So it has one or more ridges entering or exiting from the same side. The other thing is when you look at a loop, you can see when you look at it that there is this triangular shape in the corner here. That is what we call a delta. So a loop always has one triangular delta. It can open to one of two areas. If the radial loop opens in the direction of the thumb, it's a radial loop. If it opens towards the pinky, it is an ulnar loop. So it will tell you if it's on the right or left hand. So if this is on the right hand, then that is an ulnar loop. If this is on the left hand, then that is a radial loop. Last type is a whorl. And so a central pocket whorl has a circle or a core in the middle. It has at least one ridge that makes a complete circuit. A double loop has two loops in it, and an accidental is not covered by the other categories. Notice there are two triangular sections here where the circle meets the rest of the ridges. Those are deltas. So a whorl always has two deltas, and there are four types of whorls. So here's kind of a general, a loop, a whorl, and an arch. I've got a handout that I will give you that will kind of show you the differences between the two. Besides looking at the overall pattern, we also look at minutiae, which are characteristic patterns. So a ridge ending is a line like that that does not connect to anything. An island or a short ridge is a line like that, but it is surrounded by an oval on both sides. This one here is a bridge. An eye or an enclosure looks like that. A delta is that there, so it's where the circular part in the center of either a loop or a whorl meets the lines coming in from the side. So a loop has one delta, a whorl has two deltas. This is a bifurcation or a fork. A dot is just that. A spur is a little tiny line extending. A double bifurcation means it forks once and then one of those forks forks again. And then a trifurcation goes into three different forks. So let's look a little bit here at, and it's kind of hard to see. We're going to use magnifying glasses when we use this in class. But notice that little extension coming off of there is a spur. This is a delta. And if you look at this overall fingerprint, because the central section comes in on one side and exits out on the other, this is considered to be a loop. When you look at that, a loop has one delta, and that's part of what distinguishes it as a loop. You can see there's a scar in the fingerprint. The core is the central area of the part that goes around. So for a whorl, it is a complete circle. For a loop, it is not. An island is going to be a mark that's kind of by itself. That's a dot. You can see the bridge. They are the vertical lines that intersect the horizontal lines. A bifurcation is the same as a fork. A double bifurcation is one that divides twice, and then a ridge ending is a piece that actually immediately ends. So what we're going to be doing is going through these and getting a little bit more familiar with all of the different ridge characteristics that you can see. You are going to be going through on worksheets and labeling this. When you are in class, we will actually be going through the ridge characteristics, looking at them and marking them. So we are going to work on fingerprinting ourselves. and finding those ridge characteristics in our own fingerprints.